So after decades of Bob Lazar being ridiculed, called a liar, is he vindicated? That's what we're talking about this week. And if you are new to our channel, please like, subscribe, hit that little bell notification so it tells you about new episodes coming up. It really does help us out. I think the reason why I'm saying is he vindicated now is obviously because we've got these Tic Tac video and the gimbal video and things that have come out recently, and the government have admitted are true, which must have really confused them. You know, like when they released the statement saying this video is true, there must have been a load of people in the background with weather balloons going, "We don't need the weather balloon." It's like, but I've got debris. So, oh, are we telling the truth? There must have been so many people confused as hell.
Yes, it must have been a shock to the system for so many people that have been, pathological liars to the public for many, many years.
Yeah. There must have been the people that come up with the lies. And it's like, am I out of a job? That's my, the spin guy. Like, what? Truth?
Yeah. I think it must be a bit like that. Yeah.
So strange. But if we look at the things that Bob has been vindicated on over the years, right? There's the hand scanner, the famous hand scanner with the pins thing. Years said didn't exist, even though actually it does kind of appear in the movie that Steven Spielberg, the Close Encounters.
Mm-hmm.
There is a scene where it actually does appear. But anyway, lots of people said this is rubbish. It doesn't exist. And then through Jeremy Corbell, he actually found images of it. He's spoken to engineers that said this thing was horrible. It was a useless machine. It barely ever worked. They used it in, and then it does exist. It's a real thing. And Bob explained it to us 30 years ago. He knew about S4. He called it S4 in 1989 as part of Area 51.
Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again. The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal buildings, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it. And
he basically made Area 51 famous, but he actually physically said about S4 at PAPOOSE Lake, and later it was found out that that was true. That is what that area is called, Section 4 of Area 51.
Yes.
So he knew that.
And by the time of 1989, when he called it that, there was no mention of that area in any official media release prior to him calling it that. So he had knowledge of what the area was called only by the American military.
It appears on no map. Yeah, no maps, nothing. Yeah. He talks about a lot of the areas being underground. Now, we've seen images of Area 51, so a lot of people said, no, you can see the buildings. But we now know a lot of what goes on in Area 51 is underground. We've had people come out and talked about underground structures. Bob talked about that. Got ridiculed for it.
Yeah. Well, if you notice, there's been a massive increase in the building of underground military bases in America and across Europe for many, many years now. Almost like the people in the positions of power know something about our past, like maybe about an asteroid impact, perhaps 12,900 years ago, that they're slowly preparing for the next episode, and they're building all these underground bases in order to save humanity from the next cataclysm.
Yeah. I will put the link to that video that we did talking about that, because that was amazing how some of these underground Hiltons have been built, these amazing hotels underground. And that was the one video that genuinely scared me, that I'm thinking, I'm scared for my children's lives. That's worrying. But I'll put the link to that video because it's fascinating stuff. Something else that Bob knew was Jane's Airways. He knew about that. Mm-hmm. People that lived in Vegas knew that these aircraft were going out to the military base, but they didn't know, one, that it was what it was called. Apparently it is called Jane's Airways. He knew about EG&G, which is a company that it actually runs
recruitment.
It runs recruitment, but actually runs Jane's Airways. And so that's their connection to that as well. But he was headhunted or recruited by EG&G when he went to work for S4. He said he worked at Los Alamos, and he was ridiculed for it. but then we know for a fact that he did. We saw the video. George Knapp took him to Los Alamos. He walked around. People were waving at him, saying hi. Nobody even asked him for ID. And he walked around the place like he owned it.
You worked there for a while, you know.
Yeah,
if you can walk around without identification, get in and chat to people that you used to be colleagues with. Yes.
But they've asked him sort of, what did you do at Los Alamos? And he's I can't say, because it was, or at least suggested the work he was doing there was a little bit illegal. But also, I mean, he signed the non-disclosure agreements and the data protection, and you know, these things. And if he actually revealed that, he would be arrested. Mm-hmm. But we know for a fact he worked at Los Alamos. That's not under debate. Terry English did the story about how he built the jet car, and they talked about in that story about Bob being a physicist who worked at Los Alamos. Mm-hmm. That wasn't questioned at the time. And when, again, Corbell has gone back and talked to this reporter, he said, yeah, if I'd have got that wrong, they'd have been on me. They'd have forced me to retract it. So I am confident he was a physicist who worked at Los Alamos. Because that's the one thing people have said, well, maybe he was a bloody janitor at Los Alamos.
Well, you know? Possibly, yeah. It would explain how he would know everybody, I suppose, yes.
Yeah. You don't let a janitor just walk in with a camera crew and walk around.
You don't get many janitors having particle accelerators in their bedrooms when they're teenagers or in their early 20s. I can't remember where it was in his life where he had one, but it was early on in his life. He had a particle accelerator in his bedroom. Oh, exactly, I'm sorry. The level of understanding of physics required to build and successfully operate your own particle accelerator in your own home. Without,
well, let's talk about his education then, really quickly, right? Because obviously that has been deleted. Officially, all they can find is there's some records of like a community college he went to. He says he has 2 degrees, one from Caltech and one from MIT. One in physics, one in electronics and thermodynamics or something. So there are no records of that. Corbell found people that says they took him to Caltech and dropped him off, and they used to wander off into the library. So if it is a lie, he really prepared that lie 10 years in advance.
Yeah, which seems very unlikely. Or does the American government lying about something again?
Well, it doesn't make any sense as well that his education is just from like a community college. He got the job at Los Alamos. He didn't get that job, unless he was just a janitor. He didn't get that job based on no degrees and no education, right? But also, we know he's a pretty good engineer. We know, obviously, from his work now that he loves these things.
Oh, yes.
He built a jet car. Could you build a jet car? Would you even know where to start?
Yeah, probably. I could probably think about it and go do it if I wanted to. But
I think I know the basics of how a jet car works, but I'm pretty sure it would blow my face off.
Just manufacturing the jet engine in your own garage is pretty difficult to build the jet engine so that it doesn't explode in on itself.
Yeah. I think you're underestimating how hard it would be to build a jet engine. I think it'd be incredibly difficult.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. I'm not saying I don't think it's necessarily beyond me, but it would be incredibly difficult to do. Yes.
Yeah. I can't be bothered to learn the manufacturing process.
Such a young age. Yeah. Claims he's got a high level of education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields. All of his work aligns to that. The fact that he built a jet-powered car, the fact that he had a particle accelerator in his bedroom, he's got quite a good level of understanding of science and mathematics, physics.
He built a hydrogen-powered car. He built one out of his own head. There's stories about, like, J.M. Corbell says he built him a flamethrower, and it really works. And he says it puts anything Elon Musk built and sold it to shame. But, you know, Bob just built him it. Bob built him a laser. It was a toy, but Bob fiddled with it and turned it into a really powerful laser that Jeremy could start fires with. And then there's George Knapp on the most recent Joe Rogan interview saying about how George was quite worried about COVID at first, and he'd heard about these like UV things you can get that kills all the bugs. So and they didn't know at first whether you could get this thing from packages and stuff. So George was a bit worried. He happened to mention it to Bob, and Bob just went, "I don't worry about that. I've got the stuff in the garage. I'll build you one." And a couple of days later, this handmade UV generator just appeared, and George started using it. So this is a guy that he's quite a talented engineer and a very talented scientist, but he has no education.
Well, I'm sorry, that just doesn't line up. Just not generally. It could do. You know, Albert Einstein was a patent clerk.
It could be self-taught, you mean? Well, I mean, this is before the internet and stuff. You'd have to have read a lot, but I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, it's much harder for him to have done this in the 80s, probably, than it is if he was a bit younger. Yes, very much so. So I think his story about his education at prestigious places is more likely back then than it would be now. You could probably teach yourself a lot of stuff online today and wouldn't necessarily need to.
If you were bright enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are issues with his education as well that go beyond the fact that we've got no physical evidence. When he was interviewed and asked about could you name tutors and things, he struggled. He actually got some of the names wrong, which is a concern back in the 80s when he was interviewed. Now, I'm not going to say that Bob Lazar is some sort of genius, but it is true that sometimes very clever people aren't always the nicest people. They tend to be quite egocentric, quite self-absorbed. They don't really worry about the normal social conventions. They can be quite unpleasant people. They can be so focused on what they're doing that they don't really notice or worry about the things around them, like people's names. Sometimes they can just be a bit odd. There's also timeline issues that when people have looked into it and investigated it, and if he went to MIT and Caltech when he says he did, at least at one point he had to be in two places at the same time. So these are problems with the story. A lot of people aim, though, and when I've talked about this on Facebook groups and things, a lot of people say, just look up his seedy past, and you'll see that he's a dodgy character. And I think one of the things they're talking about, and George Knapp mentions his legal problems, but never goes into any details about it. The legal problems were that he was arrested for helping some prostitutes set up a brothel. And this was after he was famous. So this was after all the interviews and things. Right? And he did get arrested for it. And in Vegas, nobody actually gets charged for these things, even though what he did was illegal. But Bob did, and he ended up in court. He then, when he was asked about his background, he says, I have a degree at Caltech, I have a degree at MIT, I did this, I did that thing. They obviously then couldn't verify it. The courts couldn't verify it. The judge was going to let him off with a slap on the wrists, but kept saying, we can't verify your story, your education. So he was looking at prison time because of it. And he had weeks. I think he was being threatened with actually going to prison, and he did not change his story. He could still say, I have a degree at MIT and Caltech. So if he's lying, he's really committed to the lie. I mean, he was looking at getting gang raped in prison, and he potentially, I don't know how much that actually happens in America, but it's possible. He was looking at genuine prison time. Most people, if they were lying, would then go, yeah, okay, you got me. Can I go now?
Yep.
The videos.
Yep.
So Tic Tac, Gimbal, and the Speedster videos. These are three videos that over the last 10 to 15 years have been recorded, but now the US government actually says they are genuine, and we're still investigating these things. We're going to talk about ATIP and stuff in another video, but that these things are still being investigated. The Gimbal video in particular is related to Bob.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you talk about how Bob says the flying saucers worked,
the craft that he saw operated. Yeah.
So he said basically one of the things that's interesting about these things is they don't just they can take off vertically, but they don't then just fly around like that when they're actually things, because they've got these gravity generators underneath and they point downwards. Bob describes the propulsion system in real detail. He describes a system that is mechanical in nature in some ways, but that creates a gravitational well below the vessel.
the vessel then moves towards that gravity well. This is unlike so many other descriptions we've heard.
Flip on their side and go travel that way. So it's like a car flipping up on its thing and traveling towards, with the wheels aiming in the direction you're traveling, sort of thing. Now, that's not how most people think. So if most faked videos on Facebook, whatever, when you see these UFOs, they fly around like that, or they're just a light globe or things. We've not seen many videos where you see a vehicle that does that, you know, but the gimbal video does. Everybody looked at that video that believed Bob and went, that's what Bob was talking about. That's it.
Yep.
You know, and some people have tried to debunk it and said, oh, well, it's not really rotating. It's the way that's called the FLIR system under that was tracking the vehicle. And I'll put a link in the description about a bloke that works with these FLIR technologies. Actually, he's an engineer that works on them, and he explains far better than I ever could why it's not a lot of these debunking of the video where it says, oh, it's not really rotating, it's an effect of the optics, is not true. Whatever it is rotating.
And let's remember that the Pentagon has had these videos for years. They've been analysed repeatedly. Pilots that have been flying for decades saw these vehicles and didn't know what the hell they were looking at.
There's lots of other areas that people have like mocked Bob over the years.
Yeah.
One of them was just like that. You know, have you seen the videos he took? So he went up in the desert when he knew the aircraft was supposed to fly on a Wednesday because the highway was quietest on a Wednesday, so there was less likely chance of getting seen. So he knew about these, and why would he go up there with his mates and you know, and show it
at a party? Yeah, watching the test craft being flown out of S4. Yeah, and he knew the exact time that these craft would appear, do these incredible manoeuvres that defy our modern understanding of physics in the current scientific world.
Well, this is again the same thing. The argument is, why would he? How did he know they were going to be there? They saw something. How would he know that was going to happen?
Exactly. Unless
but the other thing is,
you know, privy to the information that others aren't.
Yeah, but then as long as the argument is, well, why did he do that? And he talks about it now. He says he was basically banished from S4. He normally would get phone calls and dragged up there at weird times. So his wife thought he was having an affair. He'd obviously found out about all this later, and his phones and things were tracked, and he agreed to be monitored while he was working at S4, and he thought that was perfectly normal because of the type of thing he was working on, which you would. If you work on an alien aircraft, you have to expect the government are going to watch you a bit, ain't you? So, unbeknown to him, his wife was having an affair. But the people, EG&G or whatever, knew. And they said one of the things they don't like is their people they want them to have a nice, stable, home life. And if you haven't, they worry. And they worry about how you might react when you find out. So they kind of banished him from S4. But he didn't know this. He just stopped getting phone calls. So he thought he would sort of like show off a bit. And this is kind of, you know, it kind of is a bit Bob, really, you know. And this is a bloke that he would go up into the desert and have firework displays once a year, fireworks that he'd made himself. And these firework displays got epic, apparently, to the point where the police actually stop him doing them because they were getting dangerous, sort of thing. They were getting big, you know. This is kind of his character, his personality, that he's a bit of an extrovert. Again, going back to this is a guy that when he knew hookers and decided to help them start a brothel. You know, this is a bit of a character, put it that way.
Yeah.
So when he got banished from S4, he kind of went, screw you, you know, and so they went on a party and looked at the UFOs 3 weekends on the trot with a barbecue out and what have you. You know, people have sort of pointed out that as a reason why it's not true. And actually, I think it adds credence to the story to me because knowing him as we do, it kind of makes sense. And he says it's his biggest regret. He says he goes to sleep sometimes just like kicking himself because if he hadn't have done that, he could have carried on working on the technology. what else could he have found out? You know, I like it when he says things like that as well, because it rings true that he actually has regrets about it. And a lot of people that are the UFO people would be quite like, you know, he's a hero, he's a whistleblower and everything. And he sort of sits there and goes, I whistleblowed because I had to, because I thought they were going to kill me. And I wish I hadn't.
Yeah.
But him there going up there and showing off to his mates is kind of consistent with what we know of his personality, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. And yeah, that's credence to the story. In fact, to be honest, I don't think there's anything as time goes on that won't probably be proven. It's what happens.
Yeah.
The truth tellers get vindicated and the liars get exposed. That's what happens over time with all lies.
Yeah. Other than his education, though, I don't see any areas of the story with Bob that hasn't been. Well, he said gravity is a wave. We now know it is.
But the fact that
then they thought it was a graviton, it was a particle thing.
His education's quite minor to me, because the fact that he doesn't have an educational history but is clearly really technically competent in STEM fields indicates he probably did have quite a high level of education. And the fact that his history is deleted and there's nothing, not just not where he said, but blank. It's obviously been deleted. It's obviously been removed. His history's been tampered with.
Yeah, back at a time when it was easier to do that, and this is what the government would do. If we talk about, so why do we think he got the job at S4 then? Right, because there must have been other people that were better qualified, better thing, and he was obviously, they must have known he was a bit of a personality. So why do you think he would actually have got the job at S4? Why did they even hire him?
Because he had a particle accelerator in his bedroom and he'd built a rocket powered car, and he's you know.
Yeah. I think
a jet powered car in his teens, early 20s. He's demonstrating quite a high level of scientific understanding of things, and probably a bit of an outside of the box thinker, because he did it all in his own garage. So they probably gave him a shot, because they were getting nowhere with all the scientists that they were using, because they were compartmentalizing the information too much and not allowing the scientists truly understand what they were working on, only little compartmentalized bits of it, which makes progress really, really slow.
I think that's dead on. I think I think he got the job because they thought he was a bit of a free thinker. Like I said, they weren't getting anywhere, so they were thinking, okay, let's think outside the box. And I possibly think they thought as well, if he did tell anybody, we can really easily discredit this guy. Yeah, and they did,
which they
proved for 30 years.
So if it's true, why not just kill him? He's an obvious threat. Well, he says they tried. He says on the motorway, on the day of an interview with George Knapp, they blew out his tyres. It's always the mysterious day. This is one area of his story I actually do struggle with, because I genuinely believe these people don't miss. So why is Bob Lazar still alive? Well, in part 3, we'll discuss a theory. Maybe he has some leverage.
I actually think on the day that if they had have killed him, if they had have just got rid of him, we wouldn't even know who Bob was. But he was a lucky bugger, and he's survived 30 years, and over the years we've slowly realised him more and more truthful. But his story it's stayed consistent, and that's what I always like about his story. The only area that he maybe has changed his mind over the years was, initially he thought he'd actually seen an alien. He actually thought he walked past a window one day, and he just saw half a second, and he saw two men stood over like a chair with what looked like a little grey alien. So he actually back in 91, 92 used to say he'd seen it.
The information is so compartmentalized, and the agencies involved in hiding this probably for the last 70 years have had so many disinformation campaigns that they could have just been messing with him, and they was deliberately meant to see that as he was walking past the window, and it wasn't actually real, or it could have been real. So I think he's changed his mind on that bit of the story, because it's the most easy part for them people to ridicule him about.
Well, I think he's grown up as well. He's maybe just realised that what he saw for half a second could have been lots of things. And may have just been. I think he's basically said he thinks it was like a crash test dummy now, He thinks it might have just been a trying to figure out. They had one of the chairs from the vehicle, or a mock-up for one of the chairs, and they were trying to figure out what sort of size a person they were trying to deal with, or an alien. What sort of sizes are there? So he says that's probably more likely. So over the years, he's sort of thought about it and reconsidered what he saw for half a second. And that's one of the things I really like about Bob's story as well, that he doesn't get drawn in to speculate too much. He'll talk about things, and he'll talk about the science things, but he says he regularly says, I can only really tell you what I had my hands on. I can tell you about the technology because I had my hands on it. I worked on it. All this other stuff you keep trying to draw me in on, and you keep trying to draw me in on UFOs and it. I'm not talking about it because I don't know. I don't know if everything I saw in those reports that they gave me at first, where they give little overviews of all the other technology, I don't know if it's true. It might be, but also it might be misinformation, because he's convinced as well that they would have told him stuff that wasn't true, so that if it started to leak, it's something they used to do. They would tell you a load of stuff. They'd tell you like 10 truths and 1 lie, but they would tell everybody a different lie. So then if it leaked out and the lie appeared, they knew who'd said it, because they said, that's Bob's lie. He did it. And he says, so he's absolutely certain he was, and he's been accused of being a shill and somebody that's been sharing misinformation. So is it possible you were tricked? And he says, yeah, it's possible.
Quite possible. Yeah.
But the gravity generator, that is true. It's not faked, because I know the science. It can't have been faked.
Bob also talks about there being a big breakthrough in another compartmentalised area of research whilst he was working/finishing to work there, which also coincides with the ex-director of Lockheed Martin, Ben Rich, making a statement in 1989 saying that they now have the power to take ET home, which was coincidentally the same time that Bob worked at S4, which is interesting because that year, 1989,
keeps coming up.
Keeps coming up.
We talk about his being consistent story as well, though, is one of the things when George Knapp was going through the story, and obviously George Knapp being an investigative reporter, not a UFO guy. He's become a UFO guy, but he wasn't at the time. He's an investigative reporter, multi-award winning. Didn't just want to prove Bob right. He wanted to prove him wrong as well, as much as, because that would have been just as good a story if it had all been BS, but one of the things George Knapp did was said, would you take a lie detector? And Bob went, yeah, didn't even hesitate. Took 4 of them. All of them were agreed that at the very least he believes what he was saying was true. And I know lie detectors aren't the most reliable technology in the world, but he took 4.
Yeah, but his willingness to take them and the fact that he passed them all, it kind of corroborates him telling the truth, and again puts it into what's more likely: Bob telling a lie, or the American government lying. And I think that the American government lying is far more likely than Bob lying. Yeah.
No, I agree with you most definitely, and I generally think there's been a witch hunt against Bob over the years. There's been, his birth certificate was destroyed. That upset the hell out of his mom. That his education was erased. Los Alamos, he said he was basically headhunted by Kirkmeyer, a company that headhunted him. George Knapp phoned Kirkmeyer and said, did he work for you? Yes. Can I have the records? Yes. 2 years later, they still hadn't shared the records, and he finally got back in touch with somebody from Kirkmeyer, and they said, we don't know who you're talking about. He never existed. I'm like, whoa, you said he did last time. Last time we spoke, you told me he did. Now you're telling me he doesn't. And I've got this other evidence to say he definitely worked at Los Alamos. So why are you now telling me he doesn't? There's been accusations on people that like debunk him or try to debunk him on Twitter and things have done some awful things. There's a video on there at the moment about how they're asking one of his mates about, did he ever hire people? He had the Photoshop thing for a bit. Yeah. Did he ever hire young girls there? And well, yeah. On a Saturday morning, whatever. I goes, oh, right, okay. What was it? And he was really interested in young girls, was he? And then was there at the brothel that he worked at? Were there underage girls there as well? I mean, they're not subtly implying that he's some sort of sexual predator or something, which is the next bit you do if you try to get somebody discredited, is you call them a pedo. and that crap sticks. You
Yeah.
know, it's a bloody witch hunt.
Yep.
So, element 115. That's the one. When I asked again on Facebook, what is the one thing that convinced people most that Bob was telling the truth? Element 115 is brought up almost all the time.
Yep.
Now, the debunkers say it's not that big a leap. Element 115, there was a gap in the periodic table. If you were a scientist and you were going to pick, you might just pick it. And then the fact that now it's being discovered, and it is this super heavy element as well, which is some people scientists got, if we could actually stabilize this, what do they think it would be like? And some particle physicists are basically saying it would be really dense. And I'm like, and that's exactly what we're talking about. If you want something that's going to create gravity, you need something that's really dense. So it's not just that they've discovered this 115; it's discovered it, and it might actually do what he says it does.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also a bit, but you could argue that maybe he just picked a number that wasn't on the periodic table and he's got lucky. But
yeah, but there's other gaps in the yeah. I don't know. I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely that he'd specify that the fuel source for an anti-gravity propulsion drive was element 115, which doesn't. We haven't managed to stabilise that in our in the atmosphere
no.
on Earth yet.
No.
It doesn't mean that it might not be stable in a different atmosphere around a different planet with different might be a bigger mass, different gravity, different. You don't know. They could have more massive elements from their sun, a composition of elements more in the heavier range, which makes element 115 stable within their solar system. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, so you imagine how it would affect the technology if this stuff was, if you could dig 115 out of the ground and it did what we think it does. We wouldn't have bothered having an internal combustion engine. We'd have gone straight to anti-grav technology. Like 50 years ago, we'd have been traveling to Mars, and it would have been easy.
I think you need to develop technologically on a reasonable linear path. You can't just jump to extracting element 115 from the ground and having a anti-gravity propulsion drive when you haven't even got jet propulsion or steam engines, or you need some kind of progression.
I'm not sure, mate. I'm not sure, because I mean, if you think about Victorian times, if they'd have dug 115 out of the ground, and you could just basically stick it to the bottom of a metal cart, and the cart floated,
they would have had no idea how to use it, what it was about.
But they'd have learned. My point is, they would
have taken years and years and years to have learned. We'd have still developed all of the other forms of propulsion first.
I'm not so sure. I think you could. I think what I think is the development would go a different way. I don't see why they would bother when they had the possibility. If they had 115 and it didn't need.
It's like the building
massive
of the
refining of
needs
things.
A plateau don't really line up, because they're supposedly the oldest, yet they're the most technologically superior in terms of the architecture.
The newer pyramids got worse and worse.
It's not how evolution works, or how the development of a skill works over generations. You have to build on the basic understanding. I just don't think you're going to be able to dig up an element out of the ground and then figure out it's got anti-gravity propulsion properties very quickly.
Maybe. One of the things that I find most interesting as well is that when Bob was talking about 115 to Jeremy Corbell for the film on Netflix, we don't know what Bob said. We know Jeremy Corbell, they went out into the woods basically, and Jeremy asked him about it, and he said they had an agreement basically that it would either be allowed in the video or not, but Bob would decide later. So then you see the bit when he's talking about it and just fast forward it through, but that's not the interesting bit of the video really. The interesting bit is then the next day, the FBI and everybody else drop on Bob and raid him. And he says it's the second or third time he's been raided by the FBI. And
if Bob is telling the truth, why isn't he dead? These are people that if they want to kill you, they kill you. But maybe it's because he actually has 115. Maybe he has some leverage, and that's why Bob is still alive.
And they tore his life to shreds the day after he was talking about sample of 115, because in the past he has said he has a sample of it. he's got some. He snuck it out, basically. He's even done this cloud chamber test, which Jeremy Corbell keeps showing the video of, but he's only got a snippet of the end because Bob taped over it. He taped over an episode of Golden Girls over it, which is, again, the more you learn about Bob, the more you go, yeah, he'd do that. And this cloud chamber test, he says, was basically an element of 115. It's like, it looks like a hockey puck. It's lead lined to keep it stable, and you put like a vapor across, like like dry ice, and you have a beam of light, and as you distort the 115, you can bend the light, because the gravity wave and actually distorts. It's so strong it can actually physically distort the light beam. So that can't be done normally without prisms and things. You can't bend light. Well, we're slowly developing the technology now, actually, where we can, but it doesn't quite work that way.
Light can refract light by changing medium. So when it goes from one surface to another medium, it refracts, and the angle of incidence changes. So technically, you're bending light when you change from one medium to another, like at the boundary between air and water.
That's what I mean. That's a refraction. He wasn't refracting it; it was physically bending it. He says we don't see it in the video that we have. We just don't see it. All we see is a bit of light going across and some vapor and stuff, because he says it's the end, it's the cool down period of the experiment. So, but the fact that he discusses it one day and then the next day, the FBI turn up, that's interesting. They're looking for something. They think he's got something.
Yep.
So what do they think he's got? I mean, they said at the time that somebody had bought something dodgy from one of his chemical company, and they wanted the records, and they said, well, you could have phoned me up for them. Why are you raiding me? Yep. So
it gives more credence to his story.
Yeah.
Why the interest if he's got nothing or done nothing that would interest the American government? All that does is vindicates his story to me, and just says that he's telling the truth, and the American government's lying, and they're trying to stop him from revealing something.
The American government wouldn't lie. Why would they lie?
No governments lie. History tells you otherwise. But...
Which is why, like, say, the Tic Tac and Gimbal videos still. I mean, I'm sort of taking the piss here. You go in, there's people in the background going, with like that. Well, I've got the air balloon stuff ready, but it genuinely, lying is their go-to. When we did 9/11, one of the things we talked about was like red flag operations, and it's
false
it's
flag.
a go-to. What did I say?
Red flag.
Did I? Oh, I don't know why I guess I said that. False flag operations. One of the last things, just want to really touch on, because you said a minute ago that like maybe 115 could exist if you had a different sort of star system where it allowed for heavier elements. Bob thinks that Zeta Reticuli is where these aircraft, these vehicles came from, these night flying saucers. He says that's where they think it came from. That's a binary star system, and it's a binary star system. When I researched it, we look at a lot, and there's lots of satellite time spent on this area, right? Which may be strange, maybe isn't. I don't know. It's about 39.3 light years away. But the interesting thing I thought was both of these stars are very similar to the sun. They're about the same size, about the same temperature. Does that mean that because it's similar to our sun, then it's potentially could have planets? I've got a fly flying around with it. It's driving me crazy. It's really big. I keep seeing it in the camera.
Yes. Well, as they've recently found out in the last 20 years, since we identified the first planet around a star, what was it, back in the late 90s?
Yeah.
We're now managed to, all the stars that you observe in the night sky are in the Milky Way galaxy, and they're pretty much in a small particular region of the Milky Way galaxy that are observable from our planet at night. Okay. They now reckon that the Milky Way galaxy has a couple of 100 billion stars, and
like 200 billion, isn't it?
And they reckon from the planets that they found already that they reckon that there is each star will have about a 20% chance of having an Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone that with liquid water that pools on the surface. So about 1 in every 5 stars you look up at night has a planet.
Which could have life on it easily.
Have life on it.
Yeah. And what we know about life on Earth is that if it can exist, it does exist. Even in very harsh environments, if it can, it does. So in that case, what's 1 in 5 of 200 billion? I can't do that math. You're better at math than me.
40 billion.
Christ.
Habitable planets in our
The
galaxy.
potential of life.
And then there are several hundred billion galaxies, all with several hundred billion of their own stars.
Yeah. And obviously, we don't live in a binary star system.
We well,
we don't currently live in a binary star system. I know this thing is about
85% of the star systems we observe in our universe are binary systems, but we're in that 15%, or have we just not found our binary star companion?
We're looking. Well, I mean, they think there's a very large object just outside the Kuiper Belt, don't they? That could be something that they're still, but because it's basically died now, it's really hard to see.
Yes.
So, but they keep doing, and there is.
What's more likely? We haven't found it yet, or. We haven't found it yet, and we adhere to the standard 85-15, and we're one of the 85% of the stars that operate as binary star systems, or we're one of the smaller percentages, the 15, and that we definitely know it's not there. I'd say the former's more likely than the latter.
Well, we also know that there is something wrong with Neptune and
something
Uranus is
the outer planet.
Yeah, that there's something quite wrong with their gravity and their orbit, and we've been trying to look for Planet X for years because we know there's something big out there that's messing with their orbit, so we can't see it. Some people say that's Nibiru. I would think it's more likely that it was some sort of brown dwarf, something really big that's
How about there's a brown dwarf's companion star with a planet orbiting around it called Nibiru?
Very possible. Well, one of the things is
that's what the Sumerian texts and the Anunnaki and the fallen angels and the Nephilim from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That's what all of the old religious texts go into. If you look into depth into most of them, they all link back to that.
And one of the interesting things about that is that we believe it's maybe observable from the southern hemisphere. Zeta Reticuli is only observable from the southern hemisphere, and then we go and build a telescope on the South Pole, well, not on the South Pole, but on Antarctica. On Antarctica, an incredibly difficult and expensive place to build a telescope and maintain a telescope. We can only go in there in the summer months, and then we have to sort of shut it down during the winter months. It's an incredibly difficult place to build a precision engineered telescope, but they did it.
Why? The reason? Because
they're looking for Planet X, or because they really wanted a good look at Zeta Reticuli.
Well,
it's both possibilities. Both possibilities. So what do you... I think I know the answer to this, but what is your thinking? Would you bet the house on Bob?
Bet the house on Bob, but I'd probably swing it 90-10 in Bob's favour that he's telling the truth.
That's the highest percentage you've come out with. You normally go about 60-70%.
Even
when you believe something, you go 60-70 normally.
I just don't see how it's likely when he keeps getting proven on most of what he's said, not change his story, and we know the American government lies and tries to keep secret technology hidden, and he was supposedly working on secret tech. It just all aligns perfectly that it's more likely that the American government's lying than that Bob's lying.
Yeah. The thing for me is as well is Joe Rogan believes him, and so to say about Joe Rogan, he's not stupid, and he has access to lots of people, the things, and the thing I like about Joe is as well that he was really big into UFOs for years, but then he kept talking to people that just talk rubbish, and so he went off it, and he says he was convinced it was all just nonsense because the people he was talking to talk nonsense, and then he came back to Bob, and he started talking this, and then he's like, I'm back into it. I'm passionate about it again. I'm talking to the right people now. Interview that Bob Lazar did. He got that migraine, and the migraine to me was suspicious.
Yeah, it did seem a little suspicious, I must admit.
It seemed very convenient in a way for Bob to sort of go, if a question came up he needed to think about, he went, oh, my head. Give me a sec, I just need to think. And then Jeremy Corbell would jump in and sort of lead him where he needed to go. I did find that a little suspicious.
Yeah, I did as well. There are some suspicious things. Yeah, maybe it's not quite 9. Maybe it's more 80-20 than 90-10. But I
actually go with you. I'm actually
likely.
90-10. I actually genuinely believe Bob, but there is that 10% that I'm just a bit like, I just want to be cautious, because he's either the most amazing whistleblower we've ever had in the alien thing, and we need to be listening to him, or he is almost a psychotic liar, because he actually believes what he's saying. When we're talking about something like this, we don't want to be tricked, do we?
His personality, his intelligence, they don't tend to pander, though, to him.
No.
Lying.
No. And I believe Bob. I believe. And
also the fact that he's got nothing to gain about going back over this story from 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
When it disrupted his life, he got raided by the FBI again. He was probably well over all of this, didn't want to get involved in it anymore, living his life outside of...
well, he talks about people camping on his lawn, doesn't he? Crazy people camping on his lawn, and he doesn't like it. I actually genuinely believe he could have got a migraine because he was as stressed as he says he was, because he's not sure this was a good idea. He wasn't sure going on Joe Rogan was a good idea.
Exactly.
So, maybe we take it for face value and go, yeah, okay, I'd be stressed as hell as well.
Yep.
But I think people go on a lot about how he looks, though, and I think this is a guy with an ego and with a personality, and he's a fascinating character anyway. I believe him. I'm 90-10, which is the highest for me, and I don't like to be tricked. I need to look at both sides of a story. I never want to be conned. I want to believe him, and that's half my problem. I want to believe him, so I'm very cautious with the evidence, and I believe him.
Yep.
Thanks very much, mate. We will have a chat next week.
No, please like it. Yeah, I was going to say please like and subscribe. I can get it out, so never mind.
Try again. I'll edit it out.
No.
I'll edit the cop out anyway.
You normally got a bit you edit in for that anyway, haven't you? Honestly?
No, I don't say it again at the end.
No.
Not normally. Just say that bit at the start.
Most people just do a 5-second stop bit, and they just insert that into the video.
Yeah, I'm not that good at editing.
Okay.